we need to talk. Welcome to Doha Debates, where we are searching for solutions to global challenges.
We have reached the tipping point on the need for climate action.
We know we're going to get more extreme weather events.
The era of cheap oil is over.
We now know that human influence is the main driver.
This is our moment.
Those at the front lines of climate change are least responsible.
We must all commit to an ambitious climate action.
And yet it's the developed world has put the carbon in the atmosphere.
And we need a much stronger response from the international community.
This is going to be with us forever.
I want us to be a united front.
We have to change things, and we are demanding change.
A tipping point, a pivotal moment for humanity to save our planet and protect future generations, to undo the damage before it becomes irreversible. Leaders meeting in Glasgow this week all agree the time to act is now. But haven't we heard all this before? With a global pandemic, rising poverty and inequality, is there enough political will to make the hard decisions to invest in our planet before it is too late? Can we rise to the challenge? That is our debate.
Please welcome your Doha Debates moderator, Ghida Fakhri.
Welcome to our third virtual Doha Debates, a code red for humanity. The alarm bells are deafening and the evidence is irrefutable. This is how the Secretary General of the United Nations qualified the latest report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC. The warning is clear. There is no time for delay. The scientists say the window of opportunity is closing fast. If we miss this moment to keep global warming in check, it may no longer be humanely possible to stop it. Do the last 3 decades of climate conferences all amount to little more than blah, 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 as Greta Thunberg puts it? Can COP26 turn a corner, another corner, or are we simply deluding ourselves? Today, our audience will be online, including our voting panel, which you can see now in our virtual set. It's made up of young people from around the world. We, of course, count on their spirited participation as well as yours. We're live on Facebook, on YouTube and Twitter. Our correspondent Nelufar, who's at COP26 in Glasgow, will explain how you can all join the conversation and get involved in this debate. Nel.
Thank you, Ghida. Yes, the main thing is to get in touch with us over at Twitter. I will be checking Twitter to see if your comments and any ideas that you have are being represented, and I will put them into the show when you hand over to me. The best way to do that is to use the hashtag #DearWorld so that I can easily find those comments. And later on in the show, when we're ready, I'll feature those. Ghida?
Thanks so much, Nelufar. We look forward to that. Before we get started with the debate, though, let's get a better sense of what we're talking about.
You're probably used to seeing images like these anytime you turn on the TV or open a window.
There is no doubt that we have entered a code red emergency, and it seems that no one is immune.
Cruelly, the people and countries who have contributed the least to climate change are already suffering from it the most.
But hold up, before we dig into that, let's make sure we have an understanding of the fundamentals of climate change.
Humans have heated the planet by 1.1 degrees Celsius since industrialization in the 1800s, mostly through burning fossil fuels, raising forests, and industrial-scale factory farming. At the 2015 Paris Climate Accords, nearly every nation in the world agreed to pursue limiting global heating to 1.5 degrees Celsius.
We are absolutely going to blow past that.
In August 2021, the IPCC released a dire report.
It confirms that even if we sharply reduce emissions right now, a global temperature increase of 1.5 degrees Celsius over the next 2 decades is essentially locked in. 1.5 degrees of warming might sound like a small number, but the effects that we will have to endure will be anything but small. But they won't affect everyone equally. Africa, as a continent, only accounts for about 3% of global emissions, and yet it suffers disproportionately. The 50 countries with the smallest greenhouse gas footprint, contributing to only 1% of emissions, will be forced to face the brunt of the devastation brought on by climate change.
Meanwhile, just 10 countries are responsible for 70% of global emissions.
People all over the world are working on finding solutions to these issues, but sometimes even our plans to find ways to lower emissions deepens inequality. So, what can we do about all of this? Actions can largely be divided into two groups: cutting down on greenhouse gas emissions to prevent future destruction and mitigating the damage that is already happening. Time is of the essence to reform how civilization is built before climate change does it for us. Where will we place our bets?
Some of the important questions, some of the important and startling statistics. Do we still have a chance to turn things around? What are the best solutions to the challenges that are posed by climate change? And how do we achieve global solidarity in the process? We'll be exploring this and much more with our guests, and they are author and activist Naomi Klein, academic and author Bjorn Lomborg, and former president and scientist Ameenah Gurib-Fakim. It's great to have you all with us here today for this debate. We'll also be joined by our connector, Govinda Clayton, a little later. Good to see you, Govinda. But for now, let's go straight to our guests.
Our first speaker, Naomi Klein, is an award-winning journalist, New York Times best-selling author, and the UBC Professor of Climate Justice at the University of British Columbia. Naomi's latest book is titled How to Change Everything: The Young Human's Guide to Protecting the Planet and Each Other.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you all for tuning in, and thank you to everyone at Doha Debates for hosting us. Wouldn't it be nice if there was one simple thing we could all do to fix our broken world? Go all in on fighting poverty or all in on renewables. The world we live in is far more complex than that. We do not face just one crisis. If COVID has taught us anything, it is that we face overlapping, accelerating, and intersecting crises. They're feeding each other. Here's a simple rule of thumb about climate disruption. Whatever was already bad without extreme weather, be it poverty or systemic discrimination, becomes catastrophic when climate disruption is layered on top of it. And so our moment calls for holistic and systemic solutions, ones designed to meet the basic needs of all, while radically lowering emissions, ones that do not gamble the lives of billions on capitalist shell games. The global climate justice movement has a vision and many concrete ideas. Ideas like massive public investments in public and social housing that is a right and that is both green and beautiful. Ideas like a commitment to green public schools in the poorest neighborhoods first. Renewable energy projects owned and controlled by Indigenous people and other frontline communities. Public free transit in all of our cities. Wiping out the illegitimate debts of the poorest nations, and rich countries like mine paying our climate debts. In short, we need to learn how to multitask. Where I'm from, we call it a Green New Deal. As Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said when she introduced it to the US Congress, a Green New Deal is a framework to change the building blocks of our economy so that we battle climate change and poverty at the same time. We have to take it global. You will hear today that we don't have the money, that we have to choose between fighting poverty and fighting climate change. But the truth is actually even harder to hear. The governments of wealthy countries don't have any intention of doing either. They'll just keep talking about it. The reason for that is not because the money isn't there. It's because the money is hidden in tax havens, wasted on luxury yachts, and on vanity space races for thrill-seeking billionaires. And far, far too much of it is being spent purchasing our democracies. Barbados Prime Minister Mia Mottley has already said the most important thing that we will hear this summit. Since 2008, the central banks of rich nations created $25 trillion through quantitative easing, yet they offer crumbs for the justice-based climate transition that has been promised at summits like this again and again. So my message to you is that the single most important thing that we can do to solve any of our crises is rein in the power of transnational capital over our governments, close down the tax havens, ban corporate campaign donations, stop the revolving door between corporate lobbyists and lawmakers from spinning, and kick the oil and gas companies out of the climate negotiations once and for all. It will not fix everything, but without the courage to confront corporate rule and the greed-based logics of capitalism, I assure you that we will continue to fix absolutely nothing. Thank you.
Our second speaker, Bjorn Lomborg, is an author and visiting fellow at Stanford University's Hoover Institution, who serves as the president of the Copenhagen Consensus Center. His latest book is titled False Alarm: How Climate Change Panic Costs Us Trillions, Hurts the Poor, and Fails to Fix the Planet.
Hi, it's wonderful to be here. And again, just like Naomi, I really want to say thank you very much. Look, it's really simple. Climate change is real and it's a problem, but it's not the end of the world. This sounds surprising, but that's because relentless media stories makes it feel like the end. Look, I'm a data guy. Let me share just one important academic finding. We hear a lot about more climate disasters like floods, droughts, storms, wildfires, and extreme temperatures. But over the past century, we have good data on how many people have actually died from these climate-related disasters. In the 1920s, about 500,000 people died. Since then, deaths have declined and declined. This year is likely to end at less than 7,000 deaths. Contrary to what many hear and think, the facts show that climate disaster impacts or deaths have been reduced by 99%. Climate is not raging out of control, but lifting billions out of poverty has made us more resilient. Climate is still a problem, so let's fix it. But the current approach that we've tried for the past 30 years keeps failing, just like Naomi said. We make grand promises and never deliver. It turns out that all the climate policies of the last decade, including Paris, has made no impact on emissions. And that's not me saying it, it's the UN Environment Program. What we're doing in Glasgow is essentially doing the same thing that won't work one more time. I say we need a better way, and that way is green innovation. Instead of asking everyone in the world to drive less, eat less meat, be colder and poorer, which won't work, we should focus on green energy innovation and make green energy cheaper than fossil fuels. Let's increase current spending fivefold to 100 billion each year on innovating better batteries, solar, fusion, wind, and all the other potential solutions. If we innovate green energy to be cheaper, everyone will switch, not just rich, well-meaning people, but everyone in the world. So these are really my points. Climate change is a problem, not the end of the world. Let's stop panicking. No more failing policies. Let's fix climate like humanity has fixed most problems, with innovation. Thank you.
Our third speaker, Ameenah Gurib-Fakim, is a biodiversity scientist who served as the 6th president of Mauritius from 2015 to 2018. Ameenah was the first woman to be elected president in her native country.
I would like to thank the Doha Debate for hosting us, and as the previous speakers have said, this debate comes at a very timely moment. The climate crisis, the mother of all our problems, is threatening our existence on this planet. Climate change is impacting our health, our food, water security, and threatening our biodiversity. Biodiversity and the interconnectedness of all creatures, big and small, underpin life on Earth and provide us with all the vital ecosystemic services for free. Yet, our extractive industries keep digging out resources recklessly, destroying the forest in the global south, the lungs of our world. Whilst resources from the developing world funded the first, second, and third industrial revolutions, there is no doubt they will fund the fourth too. In addition, poorer countries are bearing the brunt of pollution caused by unsustainable practices which serve the interests of corporations in the industrialized global north. Can the global south ever expect decent compensation? If the COVID vaccine rollout is any reference, then there is precious little cause for optimism. So what to do to fix the climate crisis? Putting a stop to oil and gas extraction is unfortunately not going to happen in the immediate to near future, as our economic model is based on extraction. There is a big hype to the transition to green energies. A switch to renewables will present its own set of challenges and might not be the short-term answer. We need a global focus on emission reduction, the root cause of the climate crisis. Many other additional parameters are contributing, including intensive agricultural practices. A sustainable world sits at the nexus of the world's leaders tackling greed and inequality, which are the main drivers of our present crisis. Countries need fairer and more equitable policies. Yes, this will hurt. Profits will dip, but if we want to safeguard a future for our children, we must not destroy the branch on which we are all sitting.
Thank you to all our speakers for their insights and perspectives. A quick summary now of their key positions. Naomi Klein says, "It is now or never. Let's rein in the neoliberal form of capitalism. We face overlapping and intersecting crises." Bjorn Lomborg says, "We need to stop climate alarmism. Let's not panic, let's innovate." Ameenah Gurib-Fakim says, "We need to be realistic. We need to demand fair policies from our leaders." You heard their arguments. We now want to hear from our voting panel. Our virtual audience that is watching this debate live with us will vote on the statements we just heard. And here is how it works.
It's time to vote. We need your input to find common ground among the speakers. We want to know exactly how much value you attach to the arguments you've heard. You have a total of 100 points to divide. You can divide them over 1, 2, or all 3 statements. To do so, simply assign points to the statements on a sliding scale.
And while our voting panel makes up its mind, do join the debate by using the hashtag #DearWorld at Doha Debates. You can send us your questions, your comments, thoughts, suggestions. Do you think we should now fully commit to renewable energy sources? Can everyone make the leap and transition in time? Or should we focus on supporting research and development into more cheaper, more efficient energy sources? Should we simply learn to adapt? While you share your thoughts, let's go back to Nelufar in Glasgow and see what kinds of reactions we're getting online, Nell.
Thank you, Ghida. Yes, it's going to be intriguing to see how you manage to find some common ground around those statements, because online, opinion could not be more divided. We've got David James, who's contacted us on YouTube. And David says, "I live in a very rural part of northern Scotland. Do I want to contribute to a reduction in CO2 emissions? Yes, of course," he says. "Can I give up my diesel car? No." But he makes a more important point. The thing that really annoys me is the expectation that this is on the public. Buy an electric car, he says, install a heat pump, fit solar panels, blah, blah, blah. Is he quoting Greta there? I'm not sure. Meanwhile, governments build ever more coal-fired power stations and extract ever more hydrocarbons. So the frustration between the responsibility on producing clean energy by corporations, governments and the individual. James T. Fraser has got in touch on Facebook and says it's not gonna change, Ghida. There's no sincere effort to scale back oil use, not on the part of governments, not on the part of the oil industry or any industry that uses oil. I wonder what the people behind me at the conference will make of those sorts of opinions. And Wasim Raza has got in touch on Instagram, and Wasim says the planet is polluted by wealthy states, a point mentioned by one of our speakers. Those colonial minds are still dividing the planet. Developed, developing, underdevelopment, these are all pointless, he says. Lambert Agbodza in Ghana has said, "We are screaming, we are terrified, we need our leaders to listen." Climate change needs to be addressed now rather than later. So the message I'm getting from those people who are tuning in to Doha Debates right now is that everything is fractured. There is no consensus. How will we be able to find common ground? Rida, that's up to you and the people in the studio. But for now, I can say, please do keep sending those comments in to us. We are Doha Debates. Use the hashtag #DearWorld, and I will find them easily. Rida, back to you.
Thanks, Nell. Unsurprisingly, a lot of people you've been speaking with, and obviously those people who have been sending their comments over to us, expressing some of their dismay, the fact that they've heard a lot of good speeches, as always, but they're not necessarily buying any of it. The results of the voting are in. So which approach to combating climate change? Which of the three approaches to combating climate change has gotten the most support? Let's take a quick look. Our panel of voters, as you know, is made up of young people from different parts of the world. They have voted, and they have voted, I would say, obviously, in first place for the perspective that was articulated by Naomi Klein, not necessarily overwhelmingly, but certainly more than the other two perspectives at 39%. These are the results for now. Will these votes change after our speakers have had the chance to elaborate on their positions and flesh them out, defend them? We'll be bringing in some of your thoughts and questions, so keep those coming.
Welcome to the Majlis, a traditional Arab consensus building practice. The focus of the Majlis is to welcome critical conversations and reach solutions. Hida will encourage our speakers to bridge differences and find common ground.
So let's start our conversation, Naomi, with you. Perhaps unsurprisingly, a lot of the young people voting today have echoed your ideas. They believe that we need a fundamental change to the system. Perhaps you want to fight climate change and poverty at the same time. You say that money isn't the issue. You say the money to do it is there. We need to simply take on the capitalists, the lobbyists, the multinationals. But you do want to dismantle an entire system. If our planet is like a ship that is slowly taking on water, that is sinking, do we really have the luxury of time to go to the shipyard, to look for the blueprint of that ship and try to re-engineer its design? It might be good for the next ship, but right now we only have this one. Shouldn't we grab any tools we can find, as Bjorn is suggesting, to stop the water and fix the crack, even if the engineers we're relying on are capitalists?
I think that's a great question. And I think that my point of view and the point of view of people who are part of the climate justice movement is often misrepresented as saying we need to dismantle the entire system before we can do anything. And what I said was that we actually need to stand up to the people who are blocking the ship. We've just had this powerful example in the U.S. Senate where Joe Biden's climate agenda isn't getting through, largely because of one guy named Joe Manchin, who happens to be soaked in coal money. And we have just rampant conflict of interest among the people who were elected to enact policies and then don't do it. And then it breeds cynicism, it feeds the far right. And so, I'm not saying we have to dismantle capitalism before we do anything, but I am saying that we have to stand up to transnational capital. We have to take our democracies back from them. And that gets us to kind of the starting line of doing anything at all. I want to address this point around alarmism that Bjorn talked about, and address young people directly on this, because, Bjorn has often talked about how we're scaring young people. With the media coverage, right, and these speeches about being really on the edge. I have a 9-year-old son. He's scared. He's not scared because he's watching the news or because he heard a scary speech from Joe Biden. He's scared because summer after summer, he's breathing wildfire smoke. He's scared because in June, he lived through something called the heat dome, where 600 people died because of the heat. So I want to push back on this idea that it's not lethal and that wealth is going to save us, because it didn't work for us in British Columbia. He loves nature, and during the heat dome, more than 1 billion marine creatures died on our shores. Young people are scared because their leaders are failing them. And if we want to reassure young people, we don't say, don't panic. we take the crisis seriously and show them that we mean it. And this kind of, I want to call it predatory delay, which is not saying, oh, I'm not going to come out and deny climate change. I'm just going to say it's no big deal. And Bjorn, you have been saying this since 2002 when you founded the Copenhagen Consensus. You have been saying don't panic about climate change since before Greta Thunberg was born. You have, in the time that you have been telling us not to panic, we have lost huge swaths of the Amazon, the Great Barrier Reef. Shipping lanes have opened up in the Arctic. The only thing that hasn't changed in these 18 years since you've been telling us not to panic is you.
Bjorn, you just heard Naomi say it. You say we shouldn't panic, but it's difficult, isn't it, not to panic when science tells us that we are inches away from the precipice. Not everyone is as cool as you are. Young people are panicking. Are you denying the science? Do you think the IPCC is wrong? Are these scientists all panicking for no reason? Because 60% of young people, according to recent polls, say they fear for their future.
Yeah, so Gita, and thank you very much for having this debate. And of course, I'll also so not denying the science. I'm actually reading science. I'm actually reading all of the 4,000 pages that the UN climate panel just put out. I haven't read all of them, but I've read more than 1,000 of them and really tried to trawl through all of it. And the fundamental point is, yes, global warming is real. It is a problem, but it's by no means this end of the world. So Naomi tells us that that her son is very frightened. I'm really sorry that he is, and I obviously feel with him. But you say that it's because 600 people died from the heat dome, which is absolutely true. Let's just remember, every year in Canada and the US, the global burden of disease estimate that 2,500 people die from heat. But at the same time, 130,000 people, according to the same sources, die from cold. A new study from The Lancet showed that since 2000, so exactly the year that you mentioned, Naomi, says that we have seen increasing temperatures. We've also seen more people die from heat. You're absolutely right. 116,000 more people die globally now from heat, but 283,000 fewer people die from cold. You cannot just take one number and leave out the other. Not only does it scare your kid, that's of course your own decision, but it scares everyone and it makes for bad decisions. So if Gita, if I can just go back, because our goal here is really to find some common ground. And I agree, I agree with Naomi that it's very unlikely that we will get anything more than hot air from Glasgow, just like we've seen before. And that's, of course, why we need to find a way that will actually work. Now, I have great admiration for Naomi wanting to change the whole world, but I'm suggesting something that's a little bit more feasible and will have much greater impact, namely innovate green new energy. So I'm simply saying, let's be practical and at least do the stuff that will probably work, rather than this very, could work, but very likely not.
Is that easier said than done? Ameenah, you're a former president, a biodiversity scientist. You know what it takes to make change happen. We've been hearing these uplifting speeches by political leaders for years, but they keep pushing the can down the road, don't they? Where do you stand on how we fix this crisis? Is it by changing the rules of the game, as Naomi is suggesting, or by innovating and moving forward on different fronts? Or do you simply wait for the big polluters to come to their senses and to the rescue?
I will try to be as realistic as possible. I think I agree with the two speakers, but there is something very fundamental in what they have said. And we know that for things to happen, we need to have the political will for it to happen. But the problem is that who is going to distill that political will? Who is going to actually make the changes? Because Naomi talked about the revolving doors between lobbyists and the political world. And unfortunately, this is happening. This will keep on happening. So where is the political will to actually make the change? Bjorn mentioned that innovation will help make a difference. But the thing is that we are talking about very, very different scenarios here. If we talk about innovation to happen in the north, yes, it can happen because you have the investment, you have the space. But where the damage is happening is mostly in the south. And the South, they have, as I've said, funded the first, second, third, and they will now also fund the fourth industrial revolution. Are they going to keep on supplying the raw material? Are they going to get the compensation they deserve to actually invest in the ecosystem that can push for the innovative practices? I mean, I'll just take one simple example. We are very soon going to witness, because we're talking about innovation, we are going to be witnessing the transition to greener energies. Greener energies will require one fundamental element, which is, of course, the rare earth metal. Now, we know the rare earth metal comes from, a lot of it comes from Central Africa, African continent. Now, these are already being exploited, and the corporates are not even paying tax money to the countries where they're extracting the resources. So not only are they actually sinking further into poverty, but the very environment in which they are living is being polluted. So if we are going to rein in those capitalists, who is going to actually rein in those capitalists with the appropriate regulations? And unfortunately, we have a system which is vitiated, and they're all feeding onto each other, into the pockets of each other. So unfortunately, I am very, very pessimistic, if I may say, on the way forward, because we do not see the political will to challenge and to take on the problem head on. So this is where we are. We know the solutions are there. But what are the means? What are the resources we will have at hand to make the change happen?
Again, the political courage to make things happen. For politicians, it's always about the next elections, isn't it? If you take on those powerful fossil fuel companies, put a price on carbon, limit the production of coal, you end up with higher prices at the gas pump and potentially a loss at the next election. And we do know, don't we, where the priorities for most politicians lie. And when you consider as well that fossil fuels still make up over 80% of the world's energy, that's not going to change anytime soon, with 3 countries using more fossil fuels than the rest of the world combined, China, the US, and India, quite often not being in the room. And the other big question is, do we negotiate it with the important players, those who really would make a dent if they were to cut emissions? So lots to discuss further and to try to bridge the divide between our speakers. It's a good time now to bring in our connector.
Dr. Govinda Clayton is a senior researcher in peace processes within the Center for Security Studies at ETH Zurich. Dr. Clayton's research interests include negotiation, mediation, conflict management, and civil war. As our connector, Dr. Clayton will provide guidance on identifying common ground and steering towards bridge building and consensus.
Govinda, you've been in this unenviable position many times before. The good news here today, though, is that everyone on stage seems to agree on one thing, that we have a problem, that it's real and it needs fixing. Then it all gets a little bit more complicated, doesn't it? How do you troubleshoot when you have such divergent views? Do you see any points of convergence?
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Gita. And wow, what a discussion we're having so far. I really enjoyed each of our speakers mapping out a number of different solutions to this, one of the most pressing problems facing us today. But this is Doha Debates. And so unlike other shows, what we're also looking to do, rather than just focusing on these points of conflicts and contention, is to zero in a little bit more on these points of potential consensus and common ground. And I think you already touched on one, Gita, which I think is really important to accentuate, which is that all of our speakers agree that climate change is a reality, it is creating problems and accentuating, compounding others, and that some action does need to be taken. Secondly, I think we've heard from all of our speakers that the prior actions of our politicians and the international community more generally has been woefully inefficient at tackling this crisis. And sadly, none of our speakers seem to have much hope that the current international summit is going to do much better. And thirdly, I think really importantly, all of our speakers seem to have a common interest in identifying and promoting the solutions that they think will produce the most amount of good for the global community in general and the global south in specifically. But now, as we kind of move into the second part of the discussion, what I'd really love to hear from all 3 of our speakers is a little bit more of an attempt to find consensus on these specific solutions. So for both Naomi and Bjorn, I'd love to hear, are there any points of consensus with regards to specific practicable policies that might connect the more broader structural and systemic change that Naomi would like to see with the more innovation and mitigation-based approaches that Bjorn's been discussing? And from Ameenah, you are the one amongst us with the most experience translating some of these theoretical discussions into more specific policy. And so I'd love to hear from you what elements you've heard from the other speakers that you really agree with and you'd like to see us move forward with. I think that would be great for me and for all of the viewers at home. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Govinda. Let's then take this question straight to Ameenah. As a former head of state, I'm sure you've had to deal with conflicting advice on big issues. How do you solve this problem? Naomi obviously doesn't believe it can be done within the capitalist system as it is today, a system based and built on making more and more profit. We need a fundamental system change, she feels. Bjorn, as you know, thinks that we need innovation, and the incentives for innovation are part of the capitalist system. So again, do we change the system? Do we work with what we have?
Thank you, Rita. I think, first of all, we cannot solve an emergency until we start treating it as an emergency. I mean, granted that the leadership is that they speak to that in the rhetoric, in the discussion they have, but I don't think deep down they really take it very, very seriously. But to actually come back to the points that Naomi has raised, yes, we need to rein in on capitalism. We need to do away with all this tax haven. We need to have people paying the taxes and corporates to start behaving themselves, because it's all very good to have philanthropy, but I think basically the countries that have done well, they are the countries with a high level of tax, and those countries, they can afford to have free healthcare, free education. And I think this is something that we need to be addressing in the discussion, and this is what people have to vote in for. And the other issue that I refer to what Bjorn has said in terms of innovation. Innovation, yes, innovation can happen. Innovation can also happen in the South. But those countries in the South can only innovate when they have the means and the resources. I mean, let's not forget as well that the global South, as I've said in my intro, is that we are the lungs of the world, and destroying the Amazon, destroying the marine area. Don't forget that 93% of greenhouse gas emission end up in the ocean. And for countries like my own country, an island country, these climate change present an existential threat. An existential threat with a rising sea level, acidification of the ocean, hurricane speed, power, you name it, it's all there. So how do we actually ensure that, again, to quote Mia Motley, what she said, mind the gap. What is the gap in the financing? In 2015, all the big countries, all the corporations, they talked about the 100 billion capitalization of the Green Fund. And we are short of about 26 billion, at least till last year. So countries have to live up to their promises. Countries have to learn to cooperate. Corporations have to pay the taxes. Essentially, all these good habits have to be in, so that we talk about increased solidarity, because climate change can be tackled provided we show solidarity, and also we also go beyond this colonial attitude which have held us back for so long. And when we see the migration of people across the world, it's going to get worse before it's, even if you think it's going to get better, it's going to get worse. And the prediction is that by the end of this century, if you don't do anything right now, if we stick to the targets which some polluting countries have put, 2060, 2070, we are going to see billions of people migrating. And they are migrating, they are escaping from the changing climate. We have already seen within our lifetime now, climate famine in Madagascar. We have seen wars starting in Syria, starting with climate change. So all the symptoms are there. So let us go towards much more solidarity so that we can bring the resources so that countries can adapt. Because for Africa, it is only about adaptation. We're not going to talk about mitigation because the continent has not polluted the world. So let us show more solidarity. Let us go towards much more sustainable practices, because it can happen, but the means have to be there. So we will have to caveat whatever we're going to say within what I've said so far in terms of the promises made.
Ameenah, you mentioned Africa, and Bjorn, as you know, Ameenah also, and so many people watching believe that this issue needs to be treated with the urgency it deserves. It needs to be treated as an emergency. But if you continue with a cavalier approach to this crisis, saying that it is just one more problem the world is facing, what do you do in entire cities like Shanghai, New York, Miami, or entire countries like the Maldives, the Seychelles, Barbados? All these low-lying island nations become completely submerged when they are at risk of disappearing, say within 100 years. What do you do then?
Well, so Gina, is it okay? Yeah. Was it a question to me? Sorry. Yes. Yes, good. All right, sorry. So Gita, thank you very much for that question. So look, first of all, I think let's try to focus on the things that we actually agree on. But just for your information, I mean, yes, if we do nothing over the next 100 years, a lot of places are going to flood. But actually, all period studies show that with very minimal adaptation, we will survive and we will actually thrive. And none of these vast floodings of Shanghai or anything else is going to happen. Actually, the academic studies, apart from the sort of scare studies, tell us that we will see ever fewer people out of poverty. We become a lot less vulnerable. Now, I would like to emphasize two things that I think both Ameenah pointed out, that Africa wants mostly adaptation. And I think that's absolutely true. Most of the developing countries want, most of all, to simply lift their populations out of poverty. And we need to remember that as one of our important goals. But as Naomi also points out, sure, we can walk and chew gum. We can do several things at one time. But what I really think we have to be careful about is two things. First, if you make this into an emergency, which I would argue in many ways that it's not, you get what we have done for the last 30 years. People panic, they say we've got to do something, and you end up exactly with 25 other conferences where we promised stuff, and now the 26th in Glasgow. The second part, of course, is that you forget to focus on the important solutions. The only way humanity has solved big problems is through innovation. If you think back to the 1970s, when there was lots of hunger in the world, the solution was not to say, let's have everyone eat a little less and then we'll ship it to the global south. That was not the solution. The real solution was the innovation that we had in the Green Revolution that basically made it possible to grow much more food from every hectare because of these better yielding seeds. That's why India has gone from almost a basket case to now being the world's leading exporter of rice. And my final thought, and I think this is an important conversation, I have a lot of understanding and sympathy for a lot of the other suggestions. So Ameenah is suggesting that we should tackle tax havens. I think that's absolutely right. Naomi was mentioning that we should have public schools that people own themselves. That also sounds like a very, very good proposal. The problem is, let's not, if we're trying to fix climate change, overburden this by trying to do all kinds of other things at the same time. I'm simply suggesting let's do something that's very specifically focused on climate and that will actually work, rather than saying, let's have a whole slew of things, let's get all of the things, a little bit like the Green New Deal tried in the US. And unfortunately, it's not going very, very well, because what happens is you end up with ideological opponents almost everywhere to some part of that deal. Let's gather everyone who actually wants to fix climate change, which is the vast majority of humanity, but let's fix it effectively and with technology that'll actually work.
Naomi, are we taking essentially too many things on at the same time? And are we scaring off a lot of people with, as Bjorn is suggesting, the doomsday scenarios, the warnings that it's all pretty much almost lost? Why bother anyway?
Thank you, Gita. Look, there's too much that Bjorn said for me to address. So I just want to apologize. I'm not going to be able to debate the Green Revolution right now, but I would say that the huge uprising of Indian farmers, the largest social movement in Indian history by many measures, would indicate that Indian farmers are not very pleased with how market mechanisms are serving them. So this is a really key question of, like, when we link fighting poverty and meeting people's basic needs with addressing climate change and lowering our emissions in line with what scientists have told us we need to do, does it make it harder or does it make it easier? And I would argue that it actually makes it easier precisely because people are juggling so many different urgent needs. Yes, climate change is an urgent crisis, an existential crisis if you're on the front lines, but so is feeding your family and so is finding work. And so when we bring these issues together and say, you know what, you don't need to choose. We can create huge numbers of family supporting jobs. We can meet your needs for water and healthcare at the same time as we lower emissions. It actually builds a much broader, more diverse movement, and a movement that is going to stand up to those vested interests that Ameenah has talked about that are standing in the way. I would argue that that the focus on market mechanisms, on these little sort of tinkering solutions, and I would object to the idea that we've been treating it like a crisis and an emergency all these years. Coming back to what I was talking about around quantitative easing and that 25 trillion. We know what it looks like to treat a crisis like a true crisis. It looks like the response to the global financial crisis in 2008. It looks like the response to COVID. And we've never treated climate like a true emergency. We've never marshaled those types of resources. And I think we should try it because what we've seen is that when we do the market-based approach, usually what it does is make life more expensive for working people who are already living close to the line, who are already very overburdened. And that often leads to backlash, right? So people feel like, hey, my energy costs are going up. The price of petrol has increased. And then you have a backlash like the Yellow Vest movement, the Gilets Jaunes movement in France. So I think we've actually tried these sort of tinkering market-based approaches. They lead to backlash. And now we should try a Green New Deal, which we've never tried, which does try to multitask. And because we are trying to find common ground, I would say to Bjorn, I agree. We need innovation, and the good news is we've had some incredible innovation, and some of it has come from markets. Some of it has come from countries like Germany and China, putting huge amounts of public dollars, and the price of solar has collapsed. Battery power and storage is vastly increasing. But my question to you is, what are you going to do about the people standing in the way? Because the problem is not technological. The problem are the vested interests of the oil and gas and coal companies who are heavily subsidized, who have bought our politicians. We have this incredible Exhibit A in Joe Manchin in the United States. And you never talk about the $520 billion, and that's a low estimate, of fossil fuel subsidies globally, and getting rid of all of the ways that we support that industry. And I'd love to hear you talk about that.
Briefly, Bjorn, how do you take on all these important players?
Yeah. So just very quickly, and Naomi, I've actually written in your home country paper, we should get rid of all fossil fuels. So I absolutely agree with you on that. And that is a terrible travesty. Remember, it's mostly in developing countries where people are basically buying off their populations. So it's Saudi Arabia, Russia, China. It used to be Indonesia, India. Sorry, say that again?
That support the poor and the ability to buy petrol, yes, and not rich countries who do not need to be subsidizing their oil and gas industries and are, like my government.
Okay, I would argue, and the International Energy Agency shows that the vast majority, so we're talking 96, 97%, goes to developing countries. But you're absolutely right. You should, for instance, be very careful to not take away subsidies for LNG, which actually often is used by really poor people to not get indoor air pollution in their homes, but take away petrol subsidies, which typically subsidize people who can afford to have a car, which is typically the middle class or above. So we absolutely agree on that point. We also agree that innovation is great. It's wonderful that we've seen solar and wind come down this much. But the problem is that solar and wind is only competitive when the sun is shining or the wind is blowing. And we still need a public policy we still need energy 24/7. And we can only get that once we also get loads of batteries that are so cheap that the combination of batteries and solar and wind are cheaper than fossil fuels. They're nowhere near right now, just to give you a sense of proportion. Right now, the world has batteries to store less than 1 minute of our electricity production. So no, we can't actually make up for when there's a cloud in front of the sun, and certainly not overnight, and certainly not when it's bad weather for weeks on end, as we've seen in Europe. So again, we need much more innovation. And the people who are saying, well, we're ready to roll it all out now, are basically saying, let's just spend a lot of money ineffectively now. Again, I want to come back, and I think this is the real problem. Naomi would love to believe that it's a few really evil fossil fuel barons that are basically in the way. But in America, as you're well known, we have less good data for the rest of the world. But in America, a very large part of the population is not willing to spend very much on tackling global warming. Proposing, for instance, Biden's net zero plan in 2050, if you do it in the most effective way, a new study in Nature shows that this will cost every American every year by 2050 about $11,000 per person per year. The average American is not willing to support $24 increase. Now, we might be able to get them up to a couple $100, but we're never going to be able to get them to thousands or tens of thousands of dollars. And suggesting that simply seems to suggest that I'm just going to ignore democracy and hope things work out. That's not the way forward.
Yeah. Can I just quickly get on to what Bjorn said?
A lot needs to be done. Ameenah, quickly before I go to a question from one of our audience members. Go ahead.
Yes, Bjorn has been saying a lot about innovation, but innovation is mostly available or owned by 12% of the world's population, and the rest of us living in the global south have to pay royalty to access those precise innovation. And we have seen the response when it came to actually looking at the COVID vaccine, the transfer. Because all the laws, they have to be made TRIPS compliant. So it's all working towards the global north. And when it comes to actually accessing the innovative practices where the global south, where the people in the global south live, and for them to survive in a changing climate, it means more money to be paid again to the north. So the whole thing is skewed, and it is not going to get us anywhere until there are major changes to the policy framework. And it is not going to happen, unfortunately.
All right, and a thumbs up from Naomi.
2 against 1.
But let's go to
2 against 1. Does that count for
2 against 1? Let's go to our students, see what they think about this issue. They've been waiting to ask some of their burning questions. Let's go to one of them.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dana. I'm from Gilbert. My question is to you, Bjorn. What does climate justice look like to you?
A simple question, Bjorn.
So I'm not sure I would call it climate justice, because really what this is about is how we make a better world. And most of how we help the future is not about climate. It's about making sure we get people out of poverty, out of starvation, out of bad schools, out of all these diseases that we can already treat. We should also fix global warming. But what I try to point out is there's two problems. We are almost exclusively focused on climate, and we forget a lot of these other things. And actually, we're spending most of the money that we used to spend, for instance, on development aid. We're now spending on climate aid instead, which is often much less effective. The second part, we should do something about climate. And we should definitely do something that actually helps the entire world. And that's about innovation again. If I can just answer both your question and really Ameenah's question at the same time. Yes, it's outrageous if the global south has to pay huge costs to use innovation. There's also a lot of push to make these innovations available. But, and again, if innovations are so good that you can actually afford to pay for them, they're typically also such that even when you have to pay for them, you will leave people better off. So one of the things we need to do is to make sure that we get the energy that's so effective and so cheap that everyone will want to buy it.
Naomi, do you agree with Bjorn's definition of climate justice?
No. Look, I just want to pick up on what Ameenah was saying about the COVID vaccine, because I think it's such a powerful example for why I'm sorry, with all respect, that Bjorn is completely wrong that innovation can fix this. Because what an example of innovation, the development in record time of these vaccines, and the whole world wants them. The demand is there, and yet it is blocked because of a system that puts profit before people. And that is the exact same logic that is standing in the way of doing what it takes to respond to this disaster. When you are in a true crisis, and if we think back to fighting fascism during the Second World War, and if we think back to the Great Depression, you know you're in a crisis because you spend what it takes, and you say some things are more important than the market, something that life is more important than the market. And if we need to do that with vaccines, and we need to do it with climate. And you, Bjorn, I'm sorry, I don't have consensus with you. I'm sorry to let you guys down at Doha Debates. I don't have consensus with somebody whose only role in this debate for almost 20 years has been to run out the clock. It is ethically reprehensible.
That's just ridiculous, Naomi, and you know that. What I've been trying to say is what you're actually saying, namely that for 20 years we haven't dealt with this smartly because people like you have constantly been saying, no, let's do all of it together. And what you end up with is nothing. I'm a little puzzled by this idea of saying that if we'd just done what Naomi had suggested, we would all have—
The concept of the Green New Deal was introduced
if we had
in
all
2018.
done what Naomi says, we would not have COVID vaccines. I'm sorry. Yes, the world is not fair. It would be wonderful if the world was entirely fair. But I'm suggesting a little bit, are you living in the real, actually trying to fix problems and make the world better? Or are you living in a world where you say, if it's not going to be fantastic, if it's not going to be total and just, I'm just not going to accept it. You have been living in a world where for 20 years, you've been delaying progress by asking for it all and getting nothing. I would like to say, let's try for something.
I agree
that's
with
smart.
Naomi. I agree with Naomi because there was a time when the United States was fairer. That was the time which preceded deregulation. And I think it's deregulation that's got us to where we are, because the deregulation has only favored a percentage. And unfortunately, a country like America is increasingly being referred to as a plutocracy, where the 1% is controlling the 99%. And this is not sustainable. And the only way to do that is to tax more so that poorer countries, I mean, poorer Americans can benefit more. And right now, as we speak, 60% of Americans cannot afford a crisis of $400. I mean, this is unacceptable from the richest country in the world. So it's called synonymous to being communist or being socialist, but we need regulations. We need government to step in. We need government to tax, and we do not want that much philanthropy. We need more tax dollars.
But Bjorn, how do you solve
quickly.
this crisis? Hold on, how do you solve this crisis within a system that keeps perpetuating these inequities?
Sorry, me?
To you, Bjorn, yes. How do you solve the crisis if you hold on to all of the structures of capitalism?
Sorry. You're not going to solve climate by wanting to make poor Americans richer. I mean, I don't understand what kind of framework my fellow panelists are living in. You're suggesting that by saying, well, we should tax more in America, we should have better healthcare in America, we should do all kinds of other things. Look, I'm from Scandinavia. I agree with many of these things, but that's not how you solve a problem by saying, I want to take on everything, and I also want to decide how things go in your country. Look, I think we need to reel this conversation back and say, do you want to solve climate change, or do you just want to stand up on a soapbox and say all kinds of nice things? I would prefer that we're actually trying to solve climate change. And again, I'm simply saying, we've tried your solution for 30 years, namely, let's make grand promises and not succeeding at all. You're saying let's do even more. I would suggest that the evidence indicate we should do something that's more realistic, and that's innovation.
Innovation, do we have to innovate?
I would just like
in our
I
way
had no
of
idea
thinking?
that I've been running. I was just going to say that I just had no idea that I was been running the world. I just had no idea that I've been running the world for the past 20 years. It's great to hear.
There you go. You have much more influence than you thought you did. Let's take another question from one of our audience members. Here we go.
Hello, I'm Natasha and I live in Qatar. My question is for Naomi. In your book On Fire, you talk about how solving climate change, especially environmental justice, requires breaking every rule in the capitalist book. And if that's the case, then what economic system are we left with?
That's a great question. And you know, the rules that I'm talking about and I list them in the book, are the rules that have been governing us throughout this whole neoliberal period, that we need to free the market. You know, this is why I'm joking to say I had no idea I had this much influence, because my impression is that I've been living in a time where the rules have been deregulate everything that you can in the interests of capital, and have free trade deals to free up transnational corporations to do whatever they want, protect their intellectual property at all costs, privatize whatever can be privatized, and austerity in the public sphere, cutting social services and the things that actually help people tangibly. This is the neoliberal history of the past 40 years, and it has stood in the way of the things that we need to do, which is invest in the public sphere, whether it's free public transit or the innovation that Bjorn's been talking about. But we also need to stand up to polluters and say, no, you can't do that. You actually have to leave that carbon in the ground, and you need to have that toughness. And as Ameenah said before, it wasn't always like this. When the polio vaccine was introduced, the doctor behind it, Jonas Salk, said, I won't patent this. Would you patent the sun? So I think the first step we need to do is confront the rules of neoliberal capital, privatization, deregulation, austerity. But we also, and this comes back to something that Ameenah talked about rare earth minerals, is that we actually need to consume less. We overconsumers. Climate change at its core is a class war. It is a crisis created overwhelmingly by the 10% richest people on this planet, overwhelmingly in the global north, but also in the global south. And we overconsumers, not we, everyone in the world, but we who are overconsumers, and I include myself in that, we have to consume less. We cannot act as if there's the ability to just expand our consumption endlessly and just switch from fossil fuels to renewables and everything will be fine.
Ameenah, are we being forced to overconsume? Are we being forced to overconsume? Why?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
The mantra is, I think it should be for the young people and also for us in our generation, is to reduce, to reuse, and to recycle. This is all the three R's we have to go away with. Unfortunately, we seem to assert our conscience by just recycling. But we need to reduce. I mean, I'll just take one sector. Let's take the fashion industry. Let's take the textile sector. I mean, this is one of the second most polluting industries in the world. And how are we going to say reduce purchasing, reduce shopping, reuse? I mean, people are not very happy to reuse. Right? It's all form part of the capitalist mantra that we need to use, consume as if we have 4 planets, but we only have one. And that has been said again, time and time again. We cannot have infinite growth in a finite planet. So we need to reassess our priorities and get it right.
We need to reassess our priorities, Bjorn. Are we getting it right when there is so much emphasis in this capitalistic system on profit, on surplus, not to mention the carbon price tag that comes along with it? The free trade that you tend to say has done so much good for the world comes at a hefty price, doesn't it?
Well, so let's just get a sense of priority here again. We've lifted 1.3 billion people out of poverty. That's one of the most amazing things. And Naomi, I'm sure she would try to sort of cover it up, but that would basically be more consumption. Look, most people want more. Most people want a good life. Most people look to the 10% and say, I would like that. And I love the fact that Naomi, in a well-constituted Canada, tells everyone else, you know what, you shouldn't quite get that. Oh, I should also be drawing down, but I haven't quite done that yet. I think fundamentally we have to realize that if you put these tag-ons to trying to fix climate change, it's no wonder most people vote against your proposals. The fundamental idea here is you need to focus on tackling climate change. And how we do that is by making smarter growth. It's by making growth that's more inclusive and more green. And yes, we can absolutely have much more growth, not in producing more refrigerators, but producing more intellectual content, producing more opportunities, more travel, more of the things that most people actually want. But the real problem here is when people start saying, no, we should inch towards degrowth, people are having it too good, they shouldn't be allowed to do as much. That's not going to work. Not only do I think it's actually a terrible argument for 90% of the world, but it's also never going to win. So again, I'm sorry to sound a little bit like a broken record, but do we want to solve climate change? Then let's do smart stuff. We agree here in this panel that the things that we've tried so far hasn't worked. So that's why I'm saying let's focus on innovation. But hey, we could also just try to tax Americans more. We could also just try to do all these other things and limit people's consumption. But I think you'll find you very quickly run out, not only of a majority, but the vast majority of humans.
The vast majority of young people, though, those who are being pulled across the world, want a planet they can live on. I'll add my 11-year-old daughter to Naomi's 9-year-old and echo also the serious concerns that the young people have about our planet. And as I say this, let us take in one more question from one of our young audience members before we go to a second round of voting.
Hello, I'm Wasif from Pakistan, and I have a question for Ameenah. Do you think we disillusion ourselves with the promise of sustainable energy as the answer to climate change while foregoing its own environmental impact and feasibility on a global scale?
Sustainable energy is being trumpeted as being the only way forward. I think for too long, we have focused on fossil fuel as being the major source of energy. And we know that the fossil fuel, coal, for example, they have been the most polluting form of energy. The next second one would be gas. But, these are some of the issues that have been, driving our energy system. Now, shifting to renewable energy means, again, access to technologies, access to other resources. And the problem is not the transition. The problem is, how are we going to get there? By what means? And more importantly, is it going to serve us all? And the way forward to me, if I can be very blunt, is that the most unpolluting form of energy that we can have, may sound controversial here, but I think this is the fact, is nuclear energy. It's the one which is going to give you less emission. Even solar power will also give you emission. But try looking at nuclear energy. Maybe a country like Pakistan is well equipped to do it. You have the ecosystem, you have the infrastructure. But again, this is not going to happen to most parts of the world where the investment is called for, and developing the ecosystem, training the manpower, all these issues need time. And this is exactly what we don't have. We don't have time. So we need to move fast. We need to get out of the trap of consuming more and more fossil fuel, turn to renewable energy, but of course, look for the investment, and the investment has to come, what Naomi has said, with the Green New Deal, because through the Green New Deal, hopefully, if ever it materializes, it will call for more sharing and more solidarity.
Naomi, to you, just very briefly before that second round of voting, do you agree with Ameenah there that nuclear energy could be the way forward? The International Atomic Energy Agency certainly believes it is. Does a massive crisis like this one require all kinds of technological advances to deal with?
Well, I would just say that I don't think that any form of energy, as you say, renewables, but certainly not nuclear, is free of the costs around extraction, waste. I mean, I've read all of these fantastic predictions about next generation nuclear and how it's just gonna it overcomes all of our concerns about waste and what we've seen in Fukushima and so on. But the fact is that the nuclear reactors that are being rolled out are not this sort of science fiction version, and it moves slower. I don't think that we should be retiring existing nuclear, except nuclear that is very unsafe. I think we need to prioritize the fossil fuel transition, but wherever possible, I think that we should prioritize renewables over nuclear in terms of new infrastructure.
All right, let's go now to a second round of voting to see if any of the minds have been changed by this discussion. Before we do that, let me quickly remind you, though, of the three different positions that we've heard this far. Naomi Klein says, it is now or never. Let's rein in the neoliberal form of capitalism. Let's work on holistic solutions to the overlapping, intersecting crises. We can fight climate change and poverty at the same time, she believes. Bjorn Lomborg disagrees. He says we need to stop what he calls climate alarmism. Let's innovate to fix the climate change problem, which is real, yes, but is not the end of the world, in his words. Let's not panic. Let's not repeat the failed policies of the past. And Ameenah says we need to be realistic, but we also need to demand fairer policies from our leaders. Climate change is impacting our health and threatening our biodiversity. A switch to renewables may not be the best short-term answer to this crisis. So after listening to all of our guests, have the members of our voting panel shifted their thinking in any significant way? They will start voting right now, and you can also join this debate by using the hashtag Doha Debates. Let us know what you think. Let's go back to Neloufar, meanwhile, to see what's happening on the ground in Glasgow, and more importantly, Nel, what's going on in cyberspace? What trends are you seeing?
Well, I can tell you that Naomi's argument seems to be getting the most traction online as she questions the involvement and how capitalism is involved, specifically when it comes to tackling the climate catastrophe. But we do seem to have a super fan of Bjorn's here. El Conde del Gulag says Bjorn is the GOAT, the greatest of all time. Alarmism is useless. More comments coming in. People just wondering exactly how to frame this discussion. There's so much to engage with when it comes to the climate crisis, and we seem to be in the debate with our guests, picking out different strands. People online, the world, the globe watching and viewing this are confused. There needs to be some sort of coherence in the way we approach the question, seems to be the general consensus. I've got another one coming in from Ilani Roman on Twitter, and they say, I hope so. To the question, is there still time to save the planet? They say, I hope so. As an author, I'd rather write about dystopian worlds rather than live in one. So that's a very good one. We've got from Mexico, Eduardo Guevara, who says, Mr. Bjorn Lomborg says that climate change is not the end of the world. Certainly we must prevent doomism, but that must not be the pretext for climate inaction. Kazi Fahim has joined us from Bangladesh. And Kazi says, the coastal area of my country is sinking. There's no one to help. Why are the developed countries not doing more? We don't want baseless hope, we want action. And that's echoed again and again in different parts of the region, Brazil, Ghana, and other countries who are tuning into this debate right now. We've got a couple of ones coming in, short ones from Ian Kilpatrick says, less talk, more action. John Nordby says, our planet will be fine. We just won't be here to mess it up any longer. So that's the kind of sentiment that we're getting online. I've got one here from Tamara Zwanak on YouTube, and Tamara says, panic is good if it motivates people to change. So someone who says alarmism can be useful if it's packaged in the right way. Rida, I've been here at COP listening and talking to the young people that you spoke about, and a lot of them embody so much of what has been in the debate, a sense of action and alarmism all in one. So it's over back to you from COP26 in Glasgow.
Action, alarmism, realism and hope, a mix of all of the above. Thanks very much, Nell, for the update. The results, I'm told, are now in. But before we look at them, let's take a quick look at the original results from our first round of voting. Here they are. Naomi at 39%, followed by Bjorn, 30% of the vote, and I should say Ameenah and then Bjorn with 31%. So what do the new votes reveal? Have the minds of our voters been changed in any dramatic way? Not quite. In fact, almost not at all. Naomi Klein has held on to her lead with 39% of the vote, so no change there at all. Stop the alarmism, let's innovate. Bjorn's perspective from 30% to 28%. And Ameenah, be realistic, but demand fair policies. Voters have been swayed to a certain extent by her vote there from 31% to 33%. So Naomi, before we end this debate, are you at all surprised by the results that we've seen? Young people, obviously around the world, want to see dramatic action. They want their governments to be taken to task. and held accountable for the pledges that they keep making. What kind of steps would you say young people need to take in order to push this change forward?
Keita, I would just say young people are doing so much right now, and it's been so moving to watch speech after speech from young activists who have gone to Glasgow, who have gone to the Youth Climate Summit, who are not able to go there but are there in spirit and are sending their messages. They are doing more than they should do. They should have to do, and it's really us, the rest of us, who need to be joining them in a true intergenerational movement. We can't pat them on the heads and say, don't be afraid. We have to respect their fear and their outrage and join them, not in a sense of alarmism without an objective, but it's not alarmist to be alarmed about a situation where we are dealing with mass extinction, when, as we heard from that survey of online comments, that people on the front lines are watching their countries disappear beneath them. What we need to do is say it is not unrealistic to treat this as a true crisis and to change what needs to be changed in the face of it and to spend what needs to be spent in order to have a true justice-based transition. So I would say to young people, you are doing the right things and you are pushing us to do more. And now the ball's in our court.
Thanks very much, Naomi. Bjorn, how do we respect people's fears when their entire future depends on what we do today? A recent poll showed that most people everywhere, across 50 countries, in fact, agree that two-thirds of them say it is a global emergency. What's your advice to people, students, who are truly afraid for their future because of the data, what it shows them, and the inertia, the inaction?
So I think there's actually two questions in your question. So the first one is, there's certainly a lot of people who are very, very afraid, but you also sort of slipped in there that it's because of the data. Let's just, again, I just have to say, look, I'm a data guy. For instance, we know the vast number of countries around the world, actually including Bangladesh, have seen increasing land area over the last 20 or 30 years while sea levels have risen, because we are a very adaptive species. What we fail to remember is that we actually know how to deal with that. And of course, Holland is a great example of that. So the reality is we need to stop scaring our kids senseless, but absolutely we should do real and smart stuff. So again, we agree here that we should take this seriously. I think we agree, for instance, that we should not close down nuclear power stations that are already up and running because they basically provide baseload power that is incredibly cheap and CO2 free. Wonderful. We should also recognize, and I think we've all said that, the current approach has not worked. And so the real question to the world and to the young people is, all right, if the current approach does not work, do we believe that more of the current approach is the right solution? I would say no, we've actually tested that pretty thoroughly for the last 30 years. And instead, I would suggest we should focus on making sure we do innovation. And Lynn, just one last point. If you look at, so we just heard from one of our listeners in Bangladesh. We actually did a big project together with the Bangladeshi government on where you can spend resources and do the very most good in Bangladesh. And again, I think we have to also ask ourselves, if we actually want to make people better off in Bangladesh, should we not use our SUV and then help them a tiny bit in 100 years? Or should we first and foremost focus on actually getting them out of poverty, making sure they have enough food, that they have good schools, all these other things? And that is also a question that we have to remember. And it's often a question that we forget when we only talk about climate. But on climate, let's focus on innovation.
Let's focus on innovation. Bjorn Lomborg, thanks very much. Ameenah, over to you. Finally, people are almost evenly split, you saw in our audience, about what the best approach might be. But many young people watching this debate here live today are people who live in the global south, in developing countries. Africa, your continent is the world's youngest. 60% of the population is, in fact, below the age of 25. How concerned should they be about their future? What can they do to make it brighter?
Thank you. I think I share the concern of the young people. Many young people in the global south they almost feel rudderless. If you look at my continent, Africa, if you look at the age gap between the young people and the leaders, I mean, you're talking about 50 years plus. So there is a chasm there in terms of what the future will look like with the present leadership that we have there. So they feel that they are not understood, their ailments and all the qualms are not addressed, the fears are not addressed. And when we look at the way the countries are being run, we see migration, which is happening, and many of these migration and many of the young people ending in the Mediterranean dying. It's because of the fact that there is no hope. They don't see any hope. They don't see any hope in their leadership. They don't see any hope in the future, and they want a better future. But what do they see? What do they see when they reach other shores? Is locked doors, is walls. And in fact, these young people, their generation, the generation previous to that, they have been the victims of exploitation. They have been the victims of colonialism, and they have been the victim of climate injustice, if we put it this way. So there is real fear, and as you have rightly said, it's one of the youngest continents. But I think the echo of what's happening in Africa also is happening everywhere else. We mentioned Bangladesh, and there are so many other countries where this sense of desperation is present. Having said this, I will add one layer. The reason why we're having this debate today is because the impacts of climate change is now being felt in the global north. Had this not been the case, have we seen not fires in Germany or in Greece or in fact, we've seen Kuwait temperature in Seattle, maybe the conversation would be different again, because we have taken too much of a status quo and running as if everything is normal. Now that things are moving north, now maybe hopefully we'll see changes happening, at least in the climate debate.
Ameenah Gurib-Fakim, thank you very much for that. As you say, lots of projections that could make anyone sort of scared about the future. Certainly, our younger audience, the World Bank says, by the time Greta Thunberg and her generation are in their late 20s, climate change could force an additional 100 million people into extreme poverty. And we know what that means for countries in the global north, as you point out, Ameenah, with climate refugees. But ending this on a more optimistic note, many young climate activists have been saying we can still turn this around if we act now. So a call to action, a collective call to action echoed by many who've joined us here today for this important debate. My thanks to Naomi Klein, Bjorn Lomborg, and Ameenah Gurib-Fakim for helping us look at this issue from so many different angles in our quest for solutions and a better world for everyone. Thank you to the Doha Debates team as well, our correspondent Nerufar, our connector Govinda, and of course to everyone who joined us online. Thank you as well to Qatar Foundation for bringing us all together once again to discuss and debate some of the most important, pressing global issues of our time. Let's continue the conversation online on Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter using the hashtag #DearWorld@DohaDebates. We hope you'll join us for our next debate. Until then, from Miri Dafakhri and the Doha Debates team, thank you all for being here.